Imagine uncovering not just a betrayal, but a plan years in the making, crafted by someone you once called a friend. This is the story of a husband who thought his marriage was perfect until small cracks revealed something darker beneath the surface. As he digs deeper, he learns the shocking truth. His wife's infidelity wasn't just a moment of weakness, but part of an elaborate scheme rooted in jealousy and revenge. Instead of falling apart, he rises with a plan of his own, turning heartbreak into strength and deception into a masterful act of justice. Stay with me to uncover the twists and turns of a tale that proves betrayal doesn't have to mean defeat. It started as a regular day, the kind you forget by the time your head hits the pillow. My wife, ever warm and dependable, was laughing at her phone. It wasn't unusual. She always had this effortless way of brightening up the room. But that laugh, it felt different. Then she said his name, Eric, her childhood friend. My gut twisted, just for a second. I shrugged it off. They hadn't seen each other in years. Who was I to question a harmless reunion? Over the next few weeks, Eric seemed to weave himself into our lives like a thread I hadn't noticed fraying before. A lunch here, a casual dinner there, always with us, never just them. But those late-night texts started. "It's nothing," she'd say, flashing her phone with a practiced smile. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. The paranoia crept in slowly, like a fog. She'd laugh longer than I remembered, at jokes I didn't hear. A quick smile at her screen would leave me wondering what the punchline was. Maybe I was overthinking it. Maybe I wasn't. It wasn't like her to guard her phone so tightly. "It's just work stuff," she'd explain, brushing past my questions like leaves scattered on the ground. Then came the dinners. Her voice carried a softness when she said his name, like it tasted better on her lips. I told myself it was nostalgia, two old friends catching up. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the outside, looking in, like a stranger in my own home. There was no proof, just a growing sense that something was shifting beneath the surface. At first, it was subtle. Little things that didn't quite add up but didn't feel worth confronting. They'd exchange knowing glances over dinner, moments I wasn't part of. Her laughter felt richer when he was around, like he understood a side of her I couldn't reach. I told myself I was imagining it, but the seed of doubt had been planted. The more I tried to ignore it, the deeper it grew. I started feeling like a ghost in my own marriage. Conversations would drift into inside jokes that only they shared, leaving me stranded on the edges. Even at home, she seemed distracted, her mind wandering to places I couldn't follow. Nights grew quieter, our connection dimmer. Every time I reached out, I felt like I was grasping at smoke. The exclusion wasn't just emotional, it was physical. I began noticing how her body language shifted. She leaned closer when he spoke, her hand lingering on his arm during a joke. The space between us, once intimate and familiar, now felt like a chasm. It wasn't overt, nothing I could call out without sounding insecure, but it was there, gnawing at me in silence. Sleep became elusive. I'd lie awake, replaying the day's moments, searching for cracks in the foundation. Was I being paranoid, or was there something real in my fears? The exhaustion seeped into my days, leaving me irritable and unfocused. I tried to act normal, to pretend everything was fine. But inside, I was unraveling, caught between suspicion and denial. The first real crack came unexpectedly, like a pebble through a glass window. A casual conversation with a mutual friend turned into a gut punch I wasn't prepared for. Over coffee, they mentioned spotting my wife and Eric at a restaurant a few days ago. They looked so deep in conversation, they said with a laugh, completely unaware of the storm brewing in my chest. I smiled, masking my reaction, but inside, a switch had flipped. I replayed their words on a loop, trying to decode what deep in conversation meant. Was it just a friendly catch-up? Or was there something more, something unsaid, but deeply felt? My mind raced, connecting dots that might not even exist. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a coincidence. That night, I couldn't sit still. I found myself revisiting moments I'd brushed off. the glances, the laughter, the guarded phone. It was like seeing a puzzle half finished, the pieces suddenly fitting together. Each memory felt sharper, more vivid, as if they'd been waiting for this trigger. My paranoia had a new fuel, and it burned brighter than ever. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I listened more carefully, watched more intently. The way her eyes lit up at a message, the way her tone shifted when she spoke about him. It wasn't proof, not really, but it was enough to keep me on edge, questioning everything. Deep down, I knew this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. It happened late one night, when her phone buzzed and she didn't stir. I lay there, the sound cutting through the stillness like a siren. For a moment, I fought the urge, but curiosity and doubt are a powerful combination. My hands moved before my conscience could stop me. I unlocked her phone, my heart pounding like a drumbeat in my chest. The messages weren't explicit, not exactly, but they didn't feel innocent either. It's always easier to talk to you. One read. Another. Wish we had more time like that. My mind spun. More time for what? The vagueness was its own kind of torment, leaving room for my imagination to fill the gaps with things I didn't want to picture. Each message felt like a dagger, small but deliberate. I sat there in the dark, staring at the screen, my mind a battlefield of emotions. Part of me wanted to wake her up, to demand answers right there and then. But another part of me, quieter, darker, wanted to wait to see how far this would go. My hands trembled as I placed the phone back on the nightstand, careful not to leave any trace of my trespass. The rest of the night was sleepless. My thoughts ricocheted between anger, sadness, and doubt. Maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. But deep down, I knew the truth was slipping out of reach, just enough to keep me questioning everything. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next few days were a blur of suspicion and overanalysis. Every word she said, every movement she made, it all felt loaded, like a game of charades where I was the only one who didn't know the answer. I started watching her more closely, keeping mental notes of the little inconsistencies. She'd mention errands but take longer than usual. Her phone was always within reach, her smile distant. I couldn't help myself. The obsession took over. I began following her, staying far enough away not to be noticed. One afternoon, she told me she was meeting a friend from work. Instead, I saw her parked in a quiet spot with Eric. They weren't touching, but their conversation seemed intimate. It was enough to ignite a fire of doubt I couldn't extinguish. My behavior started changing, and I knew it. I'd catch myself zoning out at work, replaying her every move in my head. Friends commented on how distracted I seemed. But what could I say? That I was slowly unraveling, unsure if I was losing my mind or finally seeing the truth. The paranoia was a weight I carried everywhere, heavy and inescapable. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed proof, something undeniable. So I kept digging, desperate for clarity. The lies, the strange behavior. They were piling up, but the picture was still incomplete. Every step forward seemed to lead to more questions, and I was no closer to understanding how this would all end. The moment I dreaded finally arrived, though not in the way I expected. Late one evening, while she was in the shower, her phone lit up on the nightstand. I wasn't planning to snoop again, but something about the timing felt too convenient. My chest tightened as I picked it up, my hands steady despite the storm inside me. What I found shattered any lingering doubts. It wasn't just the messages, it was the tone. Words like "miss you" and "can't wait until Friday" made my blood run cold. Then came the details. A hotel, a room number, even a time. The world seemed to slow as I stared at the screen. My heart didn't race. It just stopped, replaced by a numbing chill. I'd wanted proof, and now it was staring back at me. I didn't feel anger, not right away. Instead, there was a strange calmness, like I was watching this happen to someone else. The kind of calm that comes before a storm. I took screenshots, saving the evidence as though it might somehow lessen the blow. But nothing could prepare me for the weight of knowing, of being certain. When she came out of the shower, smiling like nothing had changed, I realized everything had. My silence felt heavy, but necessary. Confronting her wasn't the answer. Not yet. There was more to uncover, more pieces to fit together. For now, I would wait, biding my time, letting her believe I was still in the dark. I couldn't sit with the weight of it alone anymore, so I decided to confront Eric first. If anyone could crack under pressure, it would be him. We met at a quiet bar, neutral ground, where I could keep my emotions in check. I played it casual at first, letting him believe it was just a friendly catch-up. But when I brought up my suspicions, his face betrayed him before his words could. He denied it, of course, at least at first, but as I pressed harder, something shifted. His denial turned to deflection, then to anger. That's when he said it, the thing that changed everything. You always had everything handed to you. Do you know what it's like to watch someone like you win? Over and over. His voice was venomous, dripping with resentment. It hit me like a gut punch. This wasn't just about my wife. Eric had been carrying a grudge for years, one I hadn't even known existed. He admitted it then, the manipulation, the calculated moves to undermine me. My wife wasn't his only target. She was part of a bigger plan to tear apart the life I'd built. It was a betrayal deeper than I'd imagined, and somehow, that made it worse. I left the bar in a haze, my mind spinning with revelations. This wasn't about infidelity anymore. It was personal, a long-buried hatred brought to life. As I walked into the night, one thing became clear. Confronting him wasn't enough. I needed a plan, something bigger, something that would make him regret ever underestimating me. After that night, something inside me shifted. I realized that confrontation wasn't the way to win this. Eric wanted chaos, he thrived on it, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I decided to stay quiet, watching from the shadows. Every move he made, every word he said, I'd be there, documenting it, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. At home, I pretended everything was normal. I smiled, laughed, even kissed my wife goodnight. But beneath the surface, my mind was working overtime. I combed through old conversations, revisited events that suddenly made more sense in hindsight. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a detective, piecing together the puzzle he thought I'd never solve. The hardest part was keeping my emotions in check. There were moments when I wanted to scream, to demand answers from her, from him. But I knew better. Acting too soon would only ruin my plan. Instead, I started planting seeds, small, subtle hints that made them question themselves. A misplaced comment here, a curious glance there. Watching their unease grow was strangely satisfying. My plan was taking shape. It wasn't just about exposing Eric. It was about showing my wife who he really was. If she chose to stand by him after that, so be it. But I had a feeling she wouldn't. And when the moment came, when the truth was finally laid bare, I'd be the one holding all the cards. The night of the event felt like the calm before a storm. I stood among familiar faces, smiling and nodding as though everything was fine. My wife and Eric were there too, completely unaware of what was about to unfold. I had chosen this moment carefully, public enough to make retreat impossible, intimate enough to ensure every word would land like a hammer. As the evening wore on, I waited for my opening. When Eric stepped away to mingle, I seized my chance. Calmly, confidently, I began speaking to the group, weaving the truth into a story that felt almost like a confession. But this wasn't about me. It was about him, his lies, his manipulation, his betrayal. With every word, I felt the weight lifting from my chest. Eric's face turned pale when he realized what was happening. He tried to interrupt, to spin his own narrative, but it was too late. I pulled out the evidence, messages, photos, details that left no room for doubt. The gasps, the whispers, they weren't for me anymore. They were for him. He stood there, exposed and cornered, his carefully crafted facade crumbling in front of everyone. But I wasn't done. My wife, standing silently to the side, became the focus of my final words. I didn't accuse her or beg for explanations. Instead, I left her with a choice: to see the truth for what it was or to continue believing the lies. As I walked away, the room buzzed with tension. The first domino had fallen, and the rest were sure to follow. After the confrontation, I kept my distance. I needed time to think, to process what had unfolded. My wife reached out, asking for conversations, explanations, but I wasn't ready. Eric, on the other hand, disappeared into the shadows. But I wasn't done with him. Not yet. If he thought he could walk away unscathed, he was sorely mistaken. Over the following weeks, I put the final pieces of my plan into motion. I unearthed secrets Eric thought were long buried. Old debts, broken alliances, and a few enemies who'd been waiting for their moment. I didn't need to lift a finger. I simply connected the right people with the right information. His world began to crumble from the inside out, and I watched it all unfold with a quiet satisfaction. As for my wife, I left the decision in her hands. I told her she could stay and fight for our marriage or walk away. Strangely, her choice didn't matter as much as I thought it would. This wasn't about saving what we had. It was about reclaiming myself. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of clarity, a strength I didn't know I had. In the end, it wasn't revenge that defined me. It was the freedom that came after. Watching Eric's carefully constructed life fall apart was satisfying, yes. But knowing I'd risen above it, that I hadn't let their betrayal destroy me, that was the real victory. I walked away a changed man, not broken, but stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.